Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome everyone to the Sunday feast. Do we have any new guests tonight? Anyone that's here for the first time? All seasoned veteran Vaishnavas. Hare Krishna to you all. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Well, today's talk is entitled The Prince with a Million Mothers. The Prince with a Million Mothers. A thought-provoking title. Hopefully a thought-provoking class. We'll start off with a very relevant verse from the Bhagavad Gita, which sets the theme and the mood of the class. This is Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 verse 29, a famous verse where Krishna tells Arjuna, as in many of the verses of the second chapter of the Gita, of the nature of the soul, Atma. We'll chant this verse, call and response. I'll chant the line, and then you can respond. āścarya-vat paśyati kaścid enam. āścarya-vat paśyati kaścid enam. āścarya-vad vadati tathaiva cānyaḥ.
āścarya-vat vadati tathaiva cānyaḥ.
āścarya-vat cainam anyaḥ śṛṇoti.
āścarya-vat cainam anyaḥ śṛṇoti.
śrutvāpy enam veda na caiva kaścid. śrutvāpy enam veda na caiva kaścid. āścarya-vat paśyati kaścid enaṁ.
āścarya-vat paśyati kaścid enaṁ.
āścarya-vat vadati tathaiva cānyaḥ.
āścarya-vat vadati tathaiva cānyaḥ.
āścarya-vat cainam anyaḥ śṛṇoti.
āścarya-vat cainam anyaḥ śṛṇoti.
śrutvāpy enam veda na caiva kaścit.
śrutvāpy enam veda na caiva kaścit.
And we'll read the word for word. There it is. I'll read the Sanskrit. Just call and response. āścarya-vat.
āścarya-vat.
As amazing.
As amazing.
paśyati.
paśyati.
Sees. kaścit.
kaścit.
Someone.
Enam.
enam. This soul. āścarya-vat.
āścarya-vat.
As amazing.
As amazing.
Vadati. Speaks of. Tathaiva.
Thus.
Eva.
Eva.
Certainly.
Certainly.
Cha. Also.
Anyaḥ.
Another. āścarya-vat.
āścarya-vat.
Similarly amazing. Cha. Also. Enam. This soul. anyaḥ. Another. śṛṇoti. Hears of. śrutvāpy. Having heard. Api. Even. enam. This soul. veda. nose.
Nose.
Na,
Na.
never.
Never.
Cha,
Cha.
and.
And.
Eva,
Eva.
certainly.
Certainly.
Kaścit,
Kaścid.
someone.
Someone.
Could we have the lights back on? Some look on the soul as amazing. Some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. And we'll repeat that. Some look on the soul
Look on the soul
as amazing.
as amazing.
Some describe him as amazing,
Some describe him as amazing.
and some hear of him as amazing,
Some hear of him as amazing.
while others,
While others,
even after hearing about him,
even after hearing about him,
cannot understand him at all.
cannot understand him at all.
Purport by Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. You can scroll up a little bit. Purport. Since Gita Upanishad is largely based, and Gita Upanishad of course is Bhagavad Gita, is largely based on the principles of the Upanishads, it is not surprising to also find this passage from the Katha Upanishad 1-2-7. Shravanayapi bahubir yo narabhyah Shinvanto ki bahovo yam navidyuhu āścarya-vakta kushalosya labdha āścarya-sya gyata kushalanushishtah. The fact that the atomic soul is within the body of a gigantic animal, in the body of a gigantic banyan tree, and also in the microbic germs, millions and billions of which occupy only an inch of space, is certainly very amazing. Men with a poor fund of knowledge and men who are not austere cannot understand the wonders of the individual atomic spark of spirit, even though it is explained by the greatest authority of knowledge, who imparted lessons even to Brahma, the first living being in the universe. Owing to a gross material conception of things, even most men in this age cannot understand or cannot imagine how such a small particle can become both so great and so small. So men look on the soul, men look at the soul proper as wonderful, either by constitution or by description. Illusioned by the material energy, people are so engrossed in material subject matters for sense gratification that they have very little time to understand the question of self-understanding, even though it is a fact that without this self-understanding, all activities result in ultimate defeat in the struggle for existence. Perhaps they have no idea that one must think of the soul and thus make a solution to the material miseries. Some people are inclined to hear about the soul, maybe attending lectures in good association, but sometimes owing to ignorance, they are misguided by acceptance of the supersoul and the atomic soul as one, without distinction of magnitude. It is very difficult to find a man who perfectly understands the position of the supersoul, the atomic soul, their respective functions and relationships, and all other major and minor details. And it is still more difficult to find a man who has actually derived full benefit from knowledge of the soul and who is able to describe the position of the soul in different aspects. But if somehow or other one is able to understand the subject matter of the soul, then one's life is successful. The easiest process for understanding the subject matter of self, however, is to accept the statements of the Bhagavad Gita spoken by the greatest authority, Lord Krishna, without being deviated by other theories. But it also requires a great deal of penance and sacrifice, either in this life or in the previous one, before one is able to accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna can, however, be known as such, by the causeless mercy of the pure devotee and by no other way. āścarya-vat paśyati kaścid enam, āścarya-vat vadati tathaiva cānyaḥ, āścarya-vac cainam anyaḥ, śṛṇoti, śrutvāpy enam, veda kaścid. Om ajnana-timirandasya gyananjana-salakaya chaksu unmilitam yena tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya-mano bhishtam stapitam yena bhutale swayam rupa kadamayam dadati swapadantikam. So that last sentence is very important. Krishna can, however, be known as such by the causeless mercy of the pure devotee and by no other way. So it's very difficult to understand spiritual life while living in this very troublesome material world. It's very difficult to understand who God is, who we are, what is our relationship. But it is possible by the causeless grace of the pure devotees of Krishna who cast a spotlight. They light up this confusion with their instructions. So by the mercy of my spiritual master Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, we're sitting here today discussing the subject matter of the soul. Could you scroll up, Terry, to the verse itself? In this verse of Bhagavad Gita, we see a very prominent word. Now this is not a trick question, it's a very easy question. Which verse stands out? Which word stands out there? Amazing. Āścarya. Āścarya means amazing. Amazing. But Krishna mentions it 3 times. What's amazing? The soul is amazing, which means it is astonishing, impressive, causing great wonder. And the amazing, one of the most amazing things about the soul is described in the first sentence. If you just scroll down a little bit. The fact that the atomic soul is within the body of a gigantic animal, imagine a giant bull, a huge elephant, in the body of a gigantic banyan tree, huge tree. Sometimes in the Calcutta Botanical Gardens, there is a banyan tree which covers 2 acres or 3 acres. It's one tree, but it drops down so many branches and then they take root. But it's just one tree. One tree which takes up like 100 times the size of this room or more. And there's one tiny little soul. Just like you see these signs that people put on their car, baby on board. Do they have them here? They have them everywhere, baby on board. So you could put a sign on that banyan tree, soul on board. There's a tiny soul. The soul is described in the previous verse of the Gita as 1/10,000th times the tip of a hair. You take a hair, the tip of the hair, and you divide it by 100, and you divide that 100th part by another 100. That size is incalculatably small. That is the dimensions of the soul. That's just to give you an idea of the dimensions of the soul. Yet that tiny soul can inhabit the giant body of a giant beast, a giant tree, and that living being is alive. And at the same time, also in the microbic germs, millions and billions of which occupy only an inch of space. And in each of those microbic germs, there is a soul. And that's what make all of these living beings alive. So that is amazing. Āścarya, amazing. So today I'd like to share with you an amazing story about the soul from the great Bhagavad Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Who has a Who has a set of Srimad Bhagavatams at home? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Fantastic. We've got a room full of transcendentalists here today. If you don't have a set of Srimad Bhagavatams, you should ask us how you can get one. Amazing Srimad Bhagavatam. So today's class, we are referring to Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, chapters 14, 15 and 16 of the great Bhagavad Purana. Are you sitting comfortably? So we'll begin. Once upon a time, in the province of Surasena, there was a king named Chitraketu, who ruled the entire earth. During his reign, the earth produced all the necessities of life. This Chitraketu had many wives, but although he was capable of producing children, he did not receive a single child from any of them. By chance, all his wives were barren. Chitraketu, the husband of all these wives, was endowed with a beautiful form, magnanimity and youth. He was born in a high family. He had a complete education. He was wealthy and opulent, so he was like the ideal husband for any of these queens. He had everything. He was good looking, strong, healthy, powerful, all the things that a wife would want in a husband. He was born in a high family, very well educated and very opulent. So he had so many assets. But he was full of anxiety. Why was he full of anxiety?
He didn't have a child.
Because he did not have a son. He didn't have a son. Now this story takes place in India, in the province of Surasena. And previously in ancient India, polygamy was current and common. And especially the wealthy, aristocratic warrior kings, they would take more than one wife. So the story is that the great king Chitraketu married his first wife, whose name was Kritajuti. And she was actually his first wife. Well, I'm jumping ahead. She was barren. She could not produce children. And so, because the king wanted children, and the queen wanted children, he married again. Now this was allowed, and previously the men had facilities to look after more than one wife. It's not allowed pretty much in Kali Yuga. There are places in the world, on earth, where men have more than one wife. But you have to be very rich and you have to be very qualified if you're going to have more than one wife, because you're going to have more than one house. You can't put them all in one house. They've all got to have, and not only a house, but a palace, because he was a king. So it's an expensive and difficult business. So he married again. But alas, his second wife also was barren, and he married again, and he married again. And each time, by some quirk of destiny, all the wives that he married were barren, and he could not have any children. So destiny, you could say, destiny is all powerful. The queens were all beautiful, the husband was beautiful. It's described here in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the queens all had beautiful faces, attractive eyes, but neither his opulences, his hundreds of thousands of queens, nor the lands of which he was the supreme proprietor were sources of happiness for him. So King Chitraketu was very sad. What was he to do? So one day, a very powerful sage named Angira, one of the great sages of the universe, was traveling. These sages could transport themselves from one planet to another just by thinking about their destination. Extremely powerful, space traveling sages. And by the mercy of Angira, who knew that the king had a problem, because they were also pretty much omniscient in some regards. So Angira turned up at the palace. Chitraketu immediately stood up from his throne and offered him worship. Educated, cultured people know that when a great sage comes to your home, you stop everything else, you stand up and you greet them. Even if you're a great king, you stand up. You offer worship. So he offered drinking water, nice food to eat, and in this way performed his duty as a host to the great soul. When the rishi was seated very comfortably, the king, restraining his mind and senses, sat on the ground at the side of the rishi's feet. So the king knew the art of being humble also. He was the king. He was always on a higher seat than anyone else. But the sage came, the king got down from his throne, sat on the ground at the feet of the sage. This is education, this is culture. When Chitraketu bent low in humility and was seated at the lotus feet of the sage congratulated him for his humility and hospitality. The sage addressed him in the following words. Angira said, "O king, are your wives, citizens, secretaries and servants and merchants under your control? Are you also in full control of your ministers, the inhabitants of your palace, your provincial governors, your sons, and your other dependents?" These are the heavy responsibilities of the king. You have to look after everyone. Not that you lord it over them, plunder them by taxation, and go and play golf. But you actually look after everyone under your care. Oh, King Chitraketu, if the king's mind is fully controlled, all his family members and governmental officers are subordinate to him. His provincial governors present taxes on time without resistance, and what to speak of lesser servants? O great king, I can observe that your mind is not pleased. You seem not to have achieved your desired goal. Is this because of you yourself, or has it been caused by others? Your pale face reflects your deep anxiety. There is a saying that the face is the index to the mind. It's like if you want to look up something in a book, you turn to the index, or you turn to the table of contents, and you can understand what's inside the book. So similarly, the mind, the face is the index to the mind. Our spiritual master Srila Prabhupada was very expert at this art of understanding someone's mind by just looking at his face. This is actually a science called physiognomy. By the science of physiognomy, you can look at a person's face, the way the face is constructed, plus his demeanor, his complexion, the way he's looking, everything. You can tell immediately what that person's thinking. So the sage, because he knew the whole story, but he was asking anyway. I can observe that your mind is not pleased. You seem not to have achieved your goal. Is this because of you yourself, or has it been caused by others? Although the great sage knew everything, he inquired from the king in this way. Thus King Chitraketu, desiring a son, bent low in great humility and spoke to the sage as follows. King Chitraketu said, O great Lord Angira, because of austerity, knowledge and transcendental samadhi, you are freed from all the reactions of sinful life. Therefore, as a perfect yogi, you can understand everything, external and internal, regarding embodied conditioned souls like us. O great soul, you are aware of everything, yet you are asking me why I am in anxiety. Therefore, in response to your order, let me disclose the cause. Such a lovely story that there's been a number of plays, dramas. It's very dramatizable, this story. And we also did many puppet shows in the past. Puppet show. The King Chitraketu puppet show. It's there actually on YouTube. As a person aggrieved by hunger is not pleased by the external gratification of flower garlands and sandalwood pulp, I am not pleased with my empire, opulence or possessions which are desirable even for great demigods, because I have no son. So it's a good example. If you come here to the Sunday feast and you sit through my long talk, and then you're thinking, oh, when is the food coming? And then we come in and we give everyone a garland of flowers. We say, we hope you've enjoyed today's program. And you say, oh, thank you, what a beautiful garland, but where's the food? So the example is being given. He's got everything. He's the king. He's got the most opulent palace. He's got thousands of beautiful wives. He's got riches. He's got fame. He's got followers. Everything. But he doesn't have a son. Now there's an ancient system which you all know about, but you may not know the Latin name, but it's called primogeniture. Does anyone know what primogeniture means?
Sperm goes to the first son.
Right, correct. Primogeniture means, primo means the first, and geniture means born. So the system is that the firstborn son inherits the property of the father. And in the case of royalty, it's important to have a son, because when you are eventually off the throne, because you can't stay on the throne forever, you may be killed on the battlefront when you lead your troops. You don't send all the troops to war and stay behind in your bunker, but you lead the troops and you may be killed on the battle. We see in the story of the great Ramayana, we saw when was it Bali who was killed, and his son, was it who was killed in the fight between Bali and... Anyway, there's many examples. The son has to immediately take the throne. There is history, of course, in Europe also, when if the king dies prematurely, then the son may be very young. He may be just 10 years old, 12, 15 years old. Immediately they raise him to the throne. The firstborn son becomes the king, even though he's not experienced. So the king really wanted a son because he was getting old. So in response to the request of Maharaj Chitraketu, Angira Rishi, who was born of Lord Brahma's mind, was very merciful towards the king. The sage, in other words, said that I'll arrange you to have a son. I'll arrange it, even though it's impossible. None of you're potent, but your wives cannot produce the necessary ingredients for you to have a son. Both the wife and the husband both have to be medically fit for you to have a child. It seems impossible, but the sage said, I can arrange it, because the sage, he was very powerful, and he had friends in high places, so to speak. He had friends in high places. There was a demigod, a very, very powerful universal administrator, and he offered a great sacrifice, offered worship and glorification of Tvashta, the great powerful demigod Tvashta. And as part of the procedure, the rice and milk are cooked together to make payasam, or kheer, whatever you want to call it. And then, after the sacrifice, the wife is offered the kheer, the payasam. We saw that in the story of Ramayana. He gave his wives this special kheer, which has become infused with mystic power. And then he said, now your wife will become pregnant. So, O Parikshit Maharaj, best of the Bharatas, the remnants of the food offered in the yajna were given to the great sage Angira, to the first and most perfect among Chitraketu's millions of queens, whose name was Kritajuti. Well, he had a favourite queen. If a man has many wives, it's natural that he's going to have a favourite. And that can cause problems, as it did. But we don't want to jump ahead too far. So the sweet rice was offered to Kritajuti. And then the sage said, O great king, now you will have a son, who will be the cause of jubilation and lamentation. And then he disappeared. He didn't stick around to explain what he just said. And the king was left wondering, what does he mean? Jubilation, of course, because we want a son. Lamentation? What could that mean? Kritajuti, having received semen from Chitraketu, became pregnant after eating remnants of food from the yajna performed by Angira. So The king and the queen had sex, and before that she ate the sweet rice, the mystical, magical sweet rice, and voila, she became pregnant. A very special arrangement by the sage. After receiving semen from Maharaj Chitraketu, the king of Shurasena, Queen Kritajuti gradually developed in her pregnancy, O King Parikshit, just as the moon develops during the bright fortnight, so the queen develops in her pregnancy, just like this Tuesday is the new moon. The new moon is coming, and we look out tonight, and tomorrow night you'll see practically nothing there at all, dark moon. Maybe a tiny sliver, probably nothing much at all, and then Tuesday, the moon starts to grow again, and all of a sudden you can see a little sliver, and in 2 weeks' time, it's a full moon. So, in that nice analogy, that nice example is given. The queen gradually developed in her pregnancy, and in course of time, a son was born to the king. So a happy ending, but it's not the end of the story. Hearing news of this, all the inhabitants of the state of Shurasena were extremely pleased. In this age, the citizens loved the king, and the king loved the citizens. Just like in modern day Thailand, you see there's a king, and this is the only real remnants of Vedic culture. You see that the citizens adore the king, and so that was there. Not much going on in that regards these days. People generally hate the leader, criticize him. But previously the king was very beloved, and when they heard that the queen was pregnant, everyone was just blissful. And of course the king was especially pleased. After purifying himself by bathing and by decorating himself with ornaments, he engaged learned brahmanas in offering benedictions to the child and performing the birth ceremony. Many, many, many ceremonies in ancient Indian culture, wonderful ceremonies. And then he gave charity. What happens is, when there's good news and the king is happy, he gives, to celebrate the birth of the child, he gives so many things away. He asks everyone, what would you like? And whatever they like, he gives it to them, literally. So he gave the brahmanas gold, silver, ornaments, villages, horses, elephants, and 600 million cows were given away in charity. As a cloud indiscriminately pours water on the earth, the beneficent King Chitraketu, to increase the reputation, opulence, and longevity of his son, in other words, to get the blessings for his son, he distributed all these things to everyone, like rainfall. When a poor man gets some money after great difficulty, his affection for the money increases daily. Imagine someone is penniless, and then they can hardly afford to buy a litre of milk, but you see this sometimes. I was at the supermarket at Centra the other day, and I saw this person, an old man. He was all bedraggled, and he took out his wallet with his shaking hands, and I'll have a litre of milk, please, and a scratch card. So he bought a card, and he was scratching the card. No, I haven't won anything. But there are people that suddenly they win the lottery. Suddenly they win $2 million, $5 million. So those people who had nothing, and then all of a sudden they're a millionaire, they feel especially happy. So the king felt like that. He had no opportunity for children, and all of a sudden he had a son. Similarly, when King Chitraketu, after great difficulty, received a son, his affection for the son increased day after day. The mother's attraction and attention to the son, like that of the child's father, excessively increased. The other wives, seeing Kritajuti's son, were very much agitated, as if by high fevers and a desire to have sons. So this is the downside of polygamy. To try to keep everyone happy. It's not going to happen. And they all thought, well, okay, she's got a son, but we don't have any children. And this is just normal female mentality. Women, naturally behave in a certain way, and it's just the way they are. And so they couldn't. These queens, especially, they weren't very nice, as we'll read on. But they didn't accept it as destiny. They became very disturbed, and they, because what happened was the king neglected them. You see, because now he had a wife, favorite wife, and he had a son, and he neglected them. And then they condemned themselves and they lamented as follows. This is the queens talking. A wife who has no sons is neglected at home by her husband and dishonored by her co-wives exactly like a maidservant. Certainly, such a woman is condemned in every respect because of her sinful life. Even maidservants who are constantly engaged in rendering service to the husband are honored by the husband, and thus they have nothing for which to lament. Our position, however, is that we are maidservants of the maidservant. Therefore, we are most unfortunate. So the other queens were very disturbed, and they felt neglected, and they looked at the queen and her happiness and her opulence and possessing a son, and they were burning in envy, and their envy increased every day. There's a famous axiom. You've heard it before. You may not know where it came from. I thought it was from William Shakespeare, but it was not. You know the one I'm going to be quoting. There's a famous 17th century author called William Congreve, and he wrote a book or a drama called The Mourning Bride. Not mourning as in good morning. The Mourning Bride. And from that book comes the famous saying, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." So as their envy increased, they lost their intelligence. If you're envious and you become consumed with envy, you do things which you regret sometimes, if you don't have sufficient control over your mind. As their envy increased, they lost their intelligence, being extremely hard-hearted and unable to tolerate the king's neglect. They finally administered poison to the son. Heavy stuff. Well, we can't have any children, so she shouldn't have any children either. Unaware of the poison administered by her co-wives, Queen Kritajuti walked within the house thinking that her son was asleep. "My dear friend," she said to her nurse, "please bring my son here." When the maidservant approached the child, who was lying down, she saw that his eyes were turned upward. There was no signs of life, all his senses having stopped, and she could understand that the child was dead. Seeing this, she immediately cried, "Now I am doomed," and she fainted to the ground. She had to break the news to the mother. In great agitation, the maidservant struck her breast and with both hands and cried loudly in regretful words. Hearing her loud voice, the queen immediately came, and when she approached her son, she saw that he was suddenly dead. Of course, this is a true story. This is not a fable, by the way. In great lamentation, her hair and dress in disarray, the queen fell to the ground unconscious. Sometimes people faint when they hear some bad news. They actually lose consciousness. Sometimes they faint when they hear good news, but generally often bad news. Hearing the loud crying, all the inhabitants of the palace came, both men and women, being equally aggrieved. They also began to cry. The queens who had administered the poison also cried, pretentiously, knowing well their offence. It's called crocodile tears. I don't know why it's called crocodile tears. There's obviously a reason. Was that Rudyard Kipling, maybe? Anyway, I don't know the reason, where that term came from. When King Chitraketu heard of his son's death from an unknown cause, he became almost blind. Because of his great affection for his son, his lamentation grew like a blazing fire, and he went to see the dead child. He kept slipping and falling on the ground, surrounded by his ministers and other officers and the learned brahmanas present. The king approached and fell unconscious at the child's feet, his hair and dress scattered. When the king, breathing heavily, regained consciousness, his eyes were tearful and he could not speak. When the queen saw her husband, King Chitraketu emerged in great lamentation and saw the dead child, who was the only son in the family. She lamented in various ways. This increased the pain in the cause of the hearts of all the inhabitants of the palace, the ministers and the brahmanas. The garland of flowers decorating the queen's head fell, her hair scattered, falling tears melted the coryllium on her eyes and moistened her breasts, which were covered with kumkum powder. As she lamented the loss of her son, her loud crying resembled the sweet sound of the kurari bird. So everyone is lamenting. Now, we recall that the sage made there was you could say, a proviso. Yes, you will be able to have a son, but he will cause you happiness and distress. Naturally, if you hear about that, you naturally think about the good part, and you tend to put aside the importance of the bad news. So the queen lamented, "Alas, O Providence, O Creator, you are certainly inexperienced in creation, for during the lifetime of a father you have caused the death of the son, thus acting in opposition to your creative laws." So the queen started criticizing God. And this is a common event sometimes when there is great upheaval, something goes wrong. Sometimes people blame God. That's what happens. "Alas, O Providence, O Creator, you are certainly inexperienced in creation, for during the lifetime of a father you have caused the death of his son, thus acting in opposition to your creative laws. If you are determined to contradict these laws, you are certainly the enemy of the living entities and are never merciful." Our spiritual master Śrutvāpy tells the story that he had a godbrother, in other words, a person who shared the same guru, same spiritual master, and his godbrother was from Germany, who came to India and took shelter of the Bhakti Yoga path. His name was Sadananda Swami, and Sadananda Swami told the story that when, during World War I, all the men were sent to war, and then the German troops were losing very badly, so they then went back to the villages and the towns, and the first batch of soldiers were all qualified soldiers, but they were all killed, and so they conscripted practically every man, even men who were too old, too invalid, too young, too inexperienced, too foolish. They conscripted practically every male person who was not a child, because they were so desperate for soldiers, and then they were all killed, practically speaking. Practically no men returned, and the villages were full of wives and daughters and sisters and mothers with no men. And he explained that after that, all the women became atheists. They criticized, they complained. How is it possible? We prayed to God that all our men folk would come home, and none of them came home, so there can't be any God. Of course, the British were also praying the same prayer. What's God going to do? He can't fulfill everyone's desires. Someone's going to have to win the war. So anyway, in the same way, people sometimes become atheists when their wishes are not fulfilled, thinking that God is our order supplier. You just write a grocery list and God delivers. So the queen continued to lament, "My dear son, I'm helpless and very much aggrieved. You should not give up my company. Just look at your lamenting father. We are helpless, because without a son we shall have to suffer the distress of going to the darkest hellish regions. You are the only hope by which we can get out of these dark regions. Therefore I request you, don't go any further with the merciless Yamaraj. My dear son, you have slept a long time. Now please get up, please get up. Your playmates are calling you to play. Since you must be very hungry, please get up and suck my breast and dissipate our lamentation. My dear son, I'm certainly most unfortunate, for I can no longer see your mild smiling. You have closed your eyes forever. Anyone that's lost a family member, especially a young family member, can relate to this story. I therefore conclude that you have been taken from this planet to another, from which you will not return. My dear son, I can no longer hear your pleasing voice. Accompanied by his wife, who was thus lamenting for her dead son, King Chitraketu began crying loudly with an open mouth. There's different types of crying, but when you cry with an open mouth, that's like really loud, uncontrolled sobbing. As the king and queen lamented, all their male and female followers joined them in crying. Because of the sudden accident, all the citizens of the kingdom were almost unconscious. When the great sage Angira understood that the king was almost dead in an ocean of lamentation, he returned to the palace, along with Narada Rishi. So let's pause here and recapitulate what's happened. The king wanted a son, but all his queens were barren, just in case you just arrived. It seemed that he was predestined not to have any sons, not to become a father. Every single one of his wives were barren. But he persisted, he insisted. So the sage, Angira, said, okay, he struck a deal. I can arrange that you'll get a son, but there is a proviso, a caveat. The sage, Angira, gave him a warning, although he didn't really hear the warning. He said, Harsha Shoka. There's the verse describes Harsha Shoka. You know those two words? Harsha Shoka? Unhappiness. They actually named the son Harsha Shoka after Angira's prediction. And they said, your son will bring great happiness and also distress. So the father and the mother, they discussed it. And they wondered what the distress part was all about. And the king thought that perhaps this means, well, he's the only child, and if he's going to be the only child, he'll probably be spoiled a little. And if you spoil a son, sometimes he gets a little bit wild. Perhaps he'll grow up to be a very naughty boy. Perhaps he'll be out there doing all sorts of naughty adolescent boy things and causing us embarrassment. So perhaps, because if you have a child and he goes wild, and he does all sorts of, the police ring up and say, we've got your son, he's been locked up for, drunk driving or whatever. It's distressful. So the king was thinking, yeah, perhaps. But anyway, at least we've got a son. A son is better than, a bad son is better than no son, although that's not always the case. There's a Bengali proverb that said, better to have no son than a bad son, because it's like a blind eye. You have an eye which is always causing you distress and it's hurtful. It's hurting and you can't see through it. And the person that has that sort of eye condition, he thinks, better I just pull the eye out because it's just so distressful. So sometimes actually the parents lament and they say, we were better off without children. These children are just like cause us so much trouble. But the king was very hopeful and he was thinking, but anyway, a bad son is better than no son. That's generally what you think when you haven't had any kids. So you might be thinking that the sage was messing with the king. Why did the sage put the king through so much distress? Why didn't the sage just say to the king, look, you're not destined to have children, just live with it? No, he arranged this incident because there was going to be some pain, but the king would learn from the pain and he would develop, he would grow spiritually. Sometimes there has to be some distress in life for us to grow. The king actually wanted, the sage actually wanted the king to be happy. He wasn't coming there to play games with the king. But he wanted the king to be happy, but not necessarily happy as a father, but happy in the fact that he could understand what the real purpose of life was. So why so much pain? It's interesting. I remember one hospital visit. I was wandering around. I was just ready to be discharged, and I wandered into this room. This was in Sydney, And it was a room just adjacent to where I was staying. It was a room where they performed brain surgery, and also open heart surgery. I don't know whether you've ever had the opportunity of seeing the surgical equipment that they use. It's not just a little scalpel. There's these huge band saws and hacksaws and things that they have to cut you open, and they have these drills where they drill open your head and they lift up the top of your skull to get to the brain. It's not. I was just all of this equipment was sterilized, and it was all wrapped up in plastic in a place where they heat it up, ready for surgery. And I probably wasn't meant to be in that room, but anyway, I saw all of this equipment, and you see actually what a surgeon has to use on a patient. Now, if a person kidnaps someone and then hacks them up with that sort of equipment, that person will be, arrested. But the surgeon, he uses the very same equipment, horrifying equipment, in order to cure the patient of his illness. So the word sadhu, because Angira was a sadhu. Sadhu means, in Sanskrit, means to cut. To cut. So sometimes the sadhu has to speak cutting words, or he has to arrange very harsh incidents in order to cut out our ignorance, and so we can develop and be better in the end. It's like you have a brain tumor. If you have a successful surgery, the surgeon is going to cut open your skull. You're going to have scars. There's a lot of blood. There's probably not so much pain because you're unconscious, but you'll end up with no brain tumor. So the surgeon is your friend. So the sage was the friend of the king. He just wanted to see him enlightened. So he returned to see him and to see how he was going. And he brought with him Narada Muni, the great Narada Muni, who features everywhere in the Puranas. He travels from planet to planet. Very powerful sage. So when King Chitraketu, overcome by lamentation, lay like a dead body at the side of the dead body of his son, the two great sages, Narada and Angira, instructed him about spiritual consciousness. There's a long section in the Bhagavatam, but I'll summarize. The king had not been ready to hear deep spiritual knowledge before, but now he was ready, because when someone is, like it says, when people, it's called in Bengali, it's called smashan vairagya, or maybe that's a Sanskrit term, I think, smashan vairagya. In India there's this smashan, which means the burning gut, the crematorium. When you go to the crematorium, you think very gravely and philosophically. You look at life and you think, wow, this gentleman worked so hard to look after his family, and he lived a long life, and now he's just lying here, and his body is just about to be lowered into the crematorium, and his body is going to turn to ashes. And you think all these deep, pondersome, philosophical thoughts. It sort of shakes you up a little bit. But then usually you leave the crematorium and then you just go and have a drink and just forget about it. It's too difficult to think about. People become very renounced at funerals, but then of course illusion creeps back in. But the great sages didn't want that to happen, so they were asking him, now you see you're lying down next to the dead body of your son. In fact, you're lying down and he's lying down, except you're alive and he's dead. O king, what relationship does this dead body for which you lament have with you? In other words, what is your relationship now? You're lying next to a dead body. You'll say, well, that's my son. That's my son lying there. But then the intelligent person will say, but so he can't get up and behave like a son anymore. It's just a lump of flesh and blood. Actually, the person who you related to as a son has gone, and this body is left behind. But you're lying there as if he's still there. So the sage says, what relationship do you have? Do you have a relationship as father and son? Did this relationship exist before? In other words, before that soul entered the womb of your wife, Before you had a son, you had no relationship with this person. And now, and you had a relationship for a year or so, however long it was, and now the person's dead and you no longer have a relationship, not an active relationship, because it's just a body. Does it truly exist now, this relationship? Will it continue in the future? And now he gives a classic example, which you'll find in all the Vedic literatures. O king, as small particles of sand sometimes come together and are sometimes separated due to the force of the waves, the living entities who have accepted material bodies sometimes come together and are sometimes separated by the force of time. In Sanskrit, this is called, coming together means samyuj, and separation means viyuj. So in other words, you go to the beach and you see the waves are thundering on the sand. You take one of those little bits of sand and you look at that piece of sand and you think, okay, I'll put that sand back in the water. That sand's just next to that other little bit of sand. And then another wave comes, and then that piece of sand washes out into the Atlantic, and that other piece of sand washes up on the beach. And those two pieces of sand will never come together again. Never, ever, ever, ever. Ever. So similarly, you have a relationship with someone, that person is dead, that relationship is over. You will never see that person again. Not in that present form. O king, both you and we, your advisors, your wife and ministers, as well as everything moving and not moving throughout this entire cosmos, are in a temporary situation. Before our birth, this situation did not exist. And after our death, it will no longer exist. Therefore, our situation now is temporary, although it is not false. This is a vast subject of discussion, and this is how two very prominent schools of thought, the Mayavad and the Vaishnava philosophies in India, they differ. The Mayavadis, they say, everything is illusion. Everything is Jagan Mithya. This creation is false. But the Vaishnavas say, no, it is not false, but it is temporary. And the difference is, amazing example is given here, a dream, think about this one, a dream does not exist before one falls asleep. Nor does it continue after one wakes up. The period for dreaming exists only between these two times, between you falling asleep and waking up. So before you go to sleep, that dream doesn't exist. After you wake up, that dream doesn't exist. And only during that period between falling asleep and waking up is the dream existing. People cry out in their dream, a tiger. They dream that a tiger's eating them, and the person can be sitting next to them. They're screaming out loud. They see the tiger. They see the tiger. They feel the teeth of the tiger sink into their flesh and they scream. So for them, during that time, that is a real situation that's going on. They perspire, they scream, they tremble. But then they wake up and the dream is gone, the tiger's gone. So we don't lament for the situation in a dream before we go to sleep. And when we wake up, we realize, oh, there's no tiger. So life is actually like that. We're in a sleeping condition, but we come together with other living entities, we have a relationship with them, it goes for some time, and then that relationship comes to the end. So you may break up with that person, she may die, he may die, they go to war, they never come home. So that relationship will end. Or you stay together your whole life, but then, we've been married, this is our diamond anniversary, we've been married for 80 years, 75 years. You sometimes see people that have been married for 80 years. But then death will come and they will be separated. But the king was now in a state where he was very much able to hear this philosophy. Beforehand he couldn't. He was too happy. I have a son, I'm happy. Don't talk all this depressing stuff. But then all of a sudden his son is dead. So he's wanting closure. People talk about closure, just like if you hear these stories. My son went to school one day and he never came home, and the police couldn't find his body, and that was 25 years ago. So many stories like that. I want to know what happened to my son. And then they find out, maybe decades later, they found some remains and they got some DNA evidence, and they found out, yes, we found your son. And then they say, now I have some closure. So there's some relief. So the sages, they came to the king to give him some closure. And the king said, because you are great personalities, you can give me real knowledge. I am very foolish, like a village animal, like a pig or a dog, because I am in ignorance. Therefore, please enlighten me with the torch of knowledge. So this example is given in the Vedas, the torch of knowledge. Om ajnana-timirandasya jnananjana salakaya. The torch of knowledge. Torch, in other words, like a blazing torch. Like you see in those old movies, they're walking through the jungle, they have a stick which is being dipped in oil, and it's a light, and everything's lit up. They walk into the cave, and you can see everything because they have a torch. Or you can take it as an electrical torch, but anyway, you walk out in the dark, like tonight, tomorrow night, no moon, and clouds, you can't see anything, but you get out, bring out your military, powerful torch, you can see everything. So the king was praying to the sages, please give me light up my ignorance. And then the sages speak lots more philosophy in the same style as we've been talking. And too long, there's too much there for me to read, but I will leave you to read that yourselves if you have this Srimad Bhagavatam, but we're not missing out on anything. I'm just summarizing the story. So, what happens next? You would imagine that the funeral took place. In fact, the funeral did take place. I think I missed that part. But anyway, the funeral took place. Everyone gave their last respects to the dead son, and then they had to get on with their lives.
Did they not revive the son?
Don't tell the story. Spoiler alert.
I thought you said to me.
No. Now, is this the end of the story? No, it isn't. Something very unexpected happened.
Kill me now.
No, I won't do that. I won't do that, Guna. So now, what happened? Actually, they hadn't had the funeral ceremony yet. I'm jumping ahead. By his mystic power, the great sage Narada brought the dead son back to life. Shock, horror. Almost. So what just happened? The dead child has been brought back to life. Well, that was unexpected. Narada Muni said, and he's speaking to the soul inside that body, because it's a dead body, he's speaking, but somehow or other, and it's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam that great, powerful mystics can bring a dead body back to life, as long as the body's intact, as long as it's not like cut to pieces and burnt, or if the body's intact, if it's inhabitable, then the great mystics, they can actually call that dead person, come back into this body. So that's what they did. Narada Muni said, and he's speaking to the soul of that dead child, O living entity, all good fortune unto you. Just see your father and mother. All your friends and relatives are overwhelmed with grief because of your passing away. Imagine if you could say that to someone you love. We're really sorry that you've gone. You want that. Sometimes people go to mystics or go to seances and they want to speak to their dead relatives. Everybody, because you don't have closure. They died prematurely. You want to tell them how you feel. So Narada Muni says to the son, who's just been brought to life, because you died untimely, the balance of your life still remains. Sometimes young people, you see in memoriams to young people, and they say, she had her whole life ahead of her. And that's what really hurts people, because that person never grew up, never got his degree, never had a family. He died when he was in some tragic accident. So the balance of your lifetime still remains. Therefore, you may re-enter your body and enjoy the remainder of your life, surrounded by your friends and relatives. Accept the royal throne and all the opulences given by your father. Amazing. Wow. It's a happy ending to the story. Yes and no. This is a real cliffhanger, this story. This will make a great movie. So that there is a happy ending, but not the sort of happy ending that you expect. So by the mystic power of Narada Muni, the soul re-entered the dead body for a short time and spoke to Narada Muni as follows. The soul, that little baby didn't stand up and run to his daddy and say, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, I'm back. Mummy." He didn't do that. Narada Muni spoke to him, so he spoke back to Narada Muni. He said, now this is a soul, sometimes people talk about an old soul, someone who's more wise than his years. So even though this was just he died as a young baby, he's speaking now as a old soul. He said, according to the results of my fruitive activities, I, the living being, transmigrate from one body to another. Sometimes I go to the species of the demigods, sometimes to the species of the lower animals, sometimes among the vegetables, sometimes in the human species. Therefore, in which birth were these my father and mother? In which birth was she my mother, and in which birth was he my father? So everyone was quiet. Well, he's not running up and giving us a hug. But he's asking a philosophical question. How can I accept these two people as my parents? In which birth were they my parents? No one is actually my mother and father. So, and then the living entity said, just as gold and other commodities are continually transferred from one place to another in due course of purchase and sale, so the living entity, as a result of his fruitive activities, wanders throughout the entire universe. Just like you open up your wallet and you see there's a ragged €5 note, and it's been in circulation for like 5 years. Can you imagine where that €5 note has been? It's been in thousands of different pockets, thousands of different wallets, being passed from one hand to another. So the soul is like that. It goes from place to place. Just as gold and other commodities are continually transferred from one place to another in due course of purchase and sale, so the living entity, as a result of his fruitive activities, wanders throughout the entire universe, being injected into various bodies in different species of life by one kind of father to another. When the father has sex with the mother, the soul, at the time of conception, this is the Vedas describe this science in detail, the soul enters the semen of the father at the time of conception, at the moment of conception. That the soul enters that sperm, and that's the sperm that makes it to the ovum, and there's the mother has the body, and the soul is transferred by the semen, and that is the soul that's meant to be born in the womb of that mother at that time. And this doesn't happen just in the human species, but it happens everywhere. So sometimes you become a puppy, sometimes you become a kitten, sometimes you become a calf, sometimes you become a slug, sometimes you become a human being. So why did this particular soul cause his parents so much distress by dying young? And the answer is given by the great acharyas who commented on the story, and also the soul himself makes some mention here. He says, in this world, which advances like a river that carries away the living entity, all people become friends, they become relatives, and they may become enemies in due course. They may despise each other, they may love each other. Nonetheless, despite these various transactions, no one is permanently related. So the great acharyas have commented, and they said that the body, the soul that inhabited the body of King Chitraketu and Queen Kritajuti, and who is now speaking as a soul, not as an embodied person. Previously, that soul was an enemy of the king, and he was born in the king's family to cause him pain. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes people they become the parents of a serial killer, or they become the parents of Idi Amin, or they become the parents of Stalin, and they give birth to someone who is not very nice. And they give pain. I don't know whether those particular persons gave pain to their parents, but sometimes you have a child and he causes so much trouble. And it's described that it's the bad karma of the parents. They're meant to have a child which causes them trouble. And just like a king, if someone does something wrong, and in the Vedic age, there was very severe punishment. If you killed someone, if you engaged in a murder, the king would execute you immediately. There's no question of putting you in jail for 50 years and spending millions of dollars on feeding you. You get engaged in a murder, immediately hang him immediately, kill him immediately, execute immediately. And then you're completely relieved from the karma of engaging in the crime. The criminal benefits. He doesn't have to rot in jail for 50 years and then go to hell. But he's killed, his karma is immediately eradicated. A great system. And the powerful and religiously inclined leaders would do this. And so imagine a scenario where someone engages in a crime, and then he's cursed, or should I say, he's ordered to be hung, and they drag him off to the gallows. There's stories like this. Some people don't go quietly, and they're putting the noose around his neck, and he's saying, I'll get you for this, I'll get you for this. So you want to retaliate, then you take birth as in the judge's family as his son, and then you die prematurely. So this is what happened. This is what happened. So the soul of the dead son spoke. And he spoke some more verses, which we haven't got time to read. When the conditioned soul Jiva, in the form of Maharaj Chitraketu's son, had spoken in this way, and then left, because then he just spoke some more great philosophy, and everyone was hearing very, very attentively and soaking it in. And then the child just went and lied down on the bed, and then he was dead again. And everyone was stunned. When the conditioned soul, Jiva, in the form of Maharaj Chitraketu's son, had spoken in this way and then left, Chitraketu and the other relatives of the dead son were all astonished. They then cut off the shackles of their affection, which was due to their relationship with him, and gave up their lamentation. After the relatives had discharged their duties by performing the proper funeral ceremonies and burning the dead child's body, and that's another merciful thing, cremation has great power. If you've been a miscreant, or you die prematurely, or you die of an overdose, or you die in a terrible accident, and you don't know that you're dead. Some people die so quickly that they don't know they've died, and they become a ghost, and they have to wander for many, many years sometimes, looking for their body, lamenting what's going on. They suffer terribly. So in the Vedic tradition, the body is cremated. Immediately, the body is cremated, and it's cremated before the end of that day, if possible, otherwise next day. So that soul, who may be bewildered, still attached to the body that he was just living in, immediately that at the time of the cremation of the body, that attachment is gone, and you can immediately go to his next life. It's actually very scientific. But instead of that, people put your body in the ground, and then you come back and you're wandering around the cemetery, causing so much distress and terror to people. So cremation is very scientific. So they immediately cremated his body. And from hearing from him and from the sages, everyone was very sober and educated. So the dead child gave them a good education. Queen Krittajuti's co-wives who had poisoned the child were very much ashamed, and they lost all their bodily luster. While lamenting, O king, they remembered the instructions of Angira and gave up their ambition to bear children. This is the co-wives. They finally got it. Following the directions of the Brahmanas, they all went to the banks of the Jamuna and they bathed and atoned for their sinful activities. Thus, enlightened by the instructions of the Brahmana, Angira and Narada, King Chitraketu became fully aware of spiritual knowledge. As an elephant becomes free from the muddy reservoir of water, King Chitraketu came out of the dark well of family life. So, the soul of the dead child returned to tell his current set of parents not to worry. I still exist. We like to know what happened to our son, what happened to our loved one, where did they go, where are they? He came back and he told them, I'm fine, don't worry about me. I exist eternally. Krishna says in one of the previous verses to this one, for the soul, there is never birth nor death, nor having once been does he ever cease to be. The soul is undying, he's primeval, and the soul is not killed when the body is killed. So we exist eternally. So the soul very kindly came back and told his parents, don't cry for me, I'm fine. So we're all beginningless souls. This is not a story that was unique to India. This is not a story that was unique to this particular family. This happens to every single one of us. We're all beginningless. At the moment we're sitting here in a male body, in a female body, in an Irish body, in a non-Irish body. We're thinking we are who we are due to the colour of our skin. We're thinking this is me. But previously we were someone else, somewhere else. Now we're a man, previous life we may have been a woman, we may have been a cow. It's unlimited. You can be whoever you want to be. If you're thinking about women at the time of your death, you can become a woman. If you're thinking about a man at the time of death, you can become a man. If you're thinking about those damn Protestants, you can become a Protestant. And if you're thinking about those damn Catholics, you can become a Catholic. And you can keep reversing your roles life after life. If you're living in the Middle East and you're cursing the Palestinians as an Israeli, and you're thinking about the Palestinians when you die, you can become a Palestinian, and then the Palestinians can become Israelis, and it just goes on and on and on and on. So whatever you're thinking of at the time of your death, you can become. So it's open, but we don't want to keep coming back into this material world. We've had millions of mothers. The story is called The Prince with Millions of Mothers. But we've had millions of mothers. We've had millions of mothers. Dog mothers and cow mothers and giraffe mothers and human mothers. So the light has been cast by the great sages, Angira, and everyone was enlightened, and hopefully today you can also take something away from this class about the Prince with a Million Mothers. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Any quick questions? Any quick questions or doubts or comments about what we've just... It's a big subject. And this is the beautiful Srimad Bhagavatam. Now if you want to read hundreds of stories like this and learn wonderful knowledge like this, you should have a set of Srimad Bhagavatams in your home. And you can approach any of the devotees afterwards and ask them how is it possible. We'll arrange it for you. If you have a Srimad Bhagavatam in your home, your whole life will become transformed, because the Srimad Bhagavatam is the literary incarnation of God. God in the form of a set of books. That's not an exaggeration. So think about it. So Hare Krishna. Oh, do you have a question? No? No. So now we're going to have Arati and Kirtan, and then we're going to have a nice feast of Krishna Prasadam. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.